Chapter 3. Heat and Rook trailed 2 steps behind Noah Paxton as he led them through the vacant offices and cubicles of Star Real Estate Development's headquarters. In stark contrast to the go-go opulence of its lobby, the penthouse floor of the 36-story Star Point Tower had the hollow sound and feel of a foreclosed Grand Hotel after the creditors had swarmed it for everything that wasn't nailed down. The space had an eerie post-bio-disaster feel, not merely empty, abandoned. Paxton gestured to an open door and they entered his office, the only functioning one Heat had seen. He was listed as the corporation's financial officer, but his furniture was a combo plate of Staples, Office Depot, and hand-me-down Levenger. Neat and functional, but not the trappings of a Manhattan corporate head, even for a mid-size firm, and certainly not befitting the Star brand of swank and swagger. Nicky Heat heard a small chuckle from Rook, followed by the reporter's line of sight to the poster of the kitty dangling from the branch. Under its rear paws was the caption, "Hang in there, baby." Paxton didn't offer coffee from his 4-hour-old pot. They just took seats in mismatched guest chairs. He established himself in the inner curve of his horseshoe workstation. "We came to ask for your help understanding the financial state of Matthew Starr's business," said the detective, making it sound light and neutral. Noah Paxton was edgy. She was used to that. People got spooked by the badge same as they were by doctors' white coats. But this guy couldn't hold eye contact. A basic red flag. He looked distracted, like he was worried he'd left his iron plugged in at home and wanted to get there, and right now. Play it out mellow, she decided. See what tumbles when he lets himself relax. He looked at her business card and said, "Of course, Detective Heat," once more trying to hold her look, but only half making it. He made a deal of studying the card again. "There's one thing, though," he added. "Go ahead," she said, alert for the dodge or the call to the bullpen for a shyster. "No offense, Mr. Rook." "Jamie, please." "If I have to answer police questions, that's one thing, but if you're going to quote me for some expose in Vanity Fair or First Press—" "Not to worry," said Rook. "I owe it to Matthew's memory and to his family not to air his business in the pages of some magazine. I am only here on background for an article I'm doing on Detective Heat and her squad. Whatever you say about Matthew Starr's business will be off the record. I did it for Mick Jagger. I can do it for you." Heat could not believe what she'd just heard. The bald ego of a celebrity journalist at work. Not only name-dropping, but favor-dropping, and it sure didn't help get Paxton in the mood. "This is a horrible time to do this," he said, trying her now that Rook had met his terms. He turned away to study whatever was on his flat screen, and then brought it back to her. "He hasn't even been dead 24 hours. I'm in the middle of, well, you can imagine. How about tomorrow?" "I'll have a few questions." "Yes, but the files are, well, I'm saying I don't keep everything." He snapped his fingers. "Right at hand. Tell you what, why don't you tell me what you need and I can have it ready when you come back?" All right, she had tried smooth and soothe. He was still dodgy, and now he had it in his head that he could stiff-arm her out of there in lieu of an appointment at his convenience. Time, she decided, to switch tactics. "Noah, may I call you Noah? Because I want to keep this friendly while I tell you how this is going to go. Okay? This is a homicide investigation. I am not only going to ask you some questions right here and right now, I expect you to answer them. And I'm not worried about whether you have your figures," she snapped her fingers, "right at hand. Know why? I'm going to have our forensic accountants go through your books, so you can decide right now how friendly this can be. Do we understand each other, Noah?" After the smallest pause, the man put it right out there for her in a headline. Matthew Starr was broke. A calm, measured statement of fact. What else was it Nicky Heat heard behind it? Candor, for sure. He was looking her directly in the eye when he said it. There was no aversion now, only clarity. But there was something else, like he was reaching out to her, showing some other feeling. And when she struggled to grasp the word for it, Noah Paxton said it, as if he were in her mind with her. "I feel so relieved." There it was, relief. Finally I can talk about this. For the next hour, Noah did more than just talk. He unfolded the story of how a personality-branded wealth machine had been flown to great heights, piloted by the flamboyant Matthew Starr, amassing capital, acquiring key properties, and building iconic towers that indelibly shaped the world's view of the New York skyline, and then had rapidly been imploded by Starr's own hand. It was the tale of a boom-to-bust crash in a sharp downward spiral. Paxton, who corporate records said was 35, had joined the firm with his newly minted MBA near the peak of the company's upswing. His sure handling of creative financing to greenlight construction of the avant-garde star-scraper in Times Square had cemented him as Matthew Starr's most trusted employee. Perhaps because he was forthcoming now, Nicky looked at Noah Paxton and saw a trustworthiness about him. He was solid, capable, a man who would get you through the battle. She didn't have much experience with men like him. She had seen them, of course, on the Metro-North train to Darien at the end of the day, with ties loosened, sipping a can of beer from the bar car with a colleague or neighbor, or with wives and Anne Klein at prefix dinners before curtain on Broadway. That might have been Nicky in the candlelight with the absolute Cosmo, filling him in on the teacher conference and planning the week at the Vineyard, if things had gone differently for her. She wondered what it must be like to have that lawn and the reliable life with a Noah. That trust Matthew had in me, he continued, was a two-edger. I got to know all the secrets, but I also got to know all the secrets. The ugliest secret, according to Noah Paxton, was that his Midas touch boss was driving his company into the ground and couldn't be stopped. "Show me," said the detective. "You mean like now?" "Now, or in a more—" She knew the stance and let her pause do its work. "Formal setting. You choose." He opened a series of spreadsheets on his Mac and invited them inside the U of his workstation to view them on the big flat screen. The figures were startling. Then came a progression of graphs chronicling the journey of a vital real estate developer who was practically laser printing money until he plummeted off a red ink cliff, well ahead of the mortgage meltdown and ensuing foreclosure debacle. "So this isn't about hard times and a bad economy?" asked Heat, pointing over his shoulder at what looked to her like an escalator to the basement painted red. "No, and thank you for not touching my monitor. I never understood why people have to touch computer screens when they point. I know the same people who need to mime telephones with their fingers when they say call me." When they laughed, she got a whiff of something citrusy and clean off him. L'Occitan, she guessed. "How did he manage to stay in business?" asked Rook when they retook their seats. "That was my job, and it wasn't easy." And then, with a disclosure look to Nicky, "And I promise you it was all legal." All she said was, "Just tell me how." "Simple. I started liquidating and divesting, but when the real estate bust came along, it ate our lunch. That's when we ran into the buzzsaw with financing. And then we hit a snag maintaining our labor relations. You may not know it, but our sites are not working these days." Nicky nodded and swept her glance to Fat Tommy's champion. "We couldn't service our debt. We couldn't keep construction going. Here's a simple rule: no building, no rent." Heat said, "It sounds like a nightmare." "To have a nightmare, you have to be able to sleep." On the office couch, he noted the folded blanket with the pillow resting on it. "Let's call it a living hell. And that's just the business finances. I haven't even told you about his personal money problems." "Don't most CEOs build a firewall between their corporate and personal finances?" asked Rook. Damn good question. He's finally acting like a reporter, thought Nicky, so she jumped aboard. "I always thought the idea was to structure things so a failure in business doesn't wipe out the personal and vice versa. And that's how I built it when I took over his family finances, too. But you see, both sides of the firewall were blazing cash, you see." A sober look came over him, and his young face gained 20 years. "Now I truly need assurance. This is off the record, and won't leave this room." "I can promise that," said Rook. "I can't," said Detective Heat. "I told you this is a homicide investigation." "I see," he said, and then he took the plunge. Matthew Starr indulged some personal habits that compromised his personal fortune. "He did damage." Noah paused, then took the plunge. "First, he was a compulsive gambler. And by that I mean losing gambler. He not only hemorrhaged cash to casinos, from Atlantic City to Mohegan Sun, he bet the horses and on football with local bookies. He was in debt to some of these characters for serious money. Heat wrote a single word on her spiral pad. Bookies. And then there were the prostitutes. Matthew had certain, tastes we don't need to get into, unless you say so, and he satisfied them with very expensive, high-end call girls. Rook couldn't help himself. Now that's a marriage of terms that always tickles me. High-end and call girl. Like, is that your job status or a sexual position? He earned their silent stares and muttered, "Sorry, go on." "I can detail the burn rate of the money for you, but suffice it to say these and a few other habits ate away at him financially. Last spring, we had to sell the family estate in the Hamptons." Stormfall. Nicky reflected on Kimberly Starr's upset that the murder never would have happened if they'd been away in the Hamptons. Now she understood its depth and irony. "Yes, Stormfall. I don't need to tell you about the bath we took on that property in this market. Sold it to some reality show celebrity and lost millions. The cash from the sale barely made a dent in Matthew's debt. Things got so bad he ordered me to stop payments on his life insurance, which he let lapse against my advice." He jotted 2 new words. No insurance. Did Mrs. Starr know about that? In the periphery of her vision, she saw Rook lean forward in his chair. "Yes, she did. I did my best to shelter Kimberly from the seedier details of Matthew's spending, but she knew about the life insurance. I was there when Matthew told her." "And what was her reaction?" "She said—" He paused. "You have to understand she was upset." "What did she say, Noah? Her exact words, if you remember." "She said, 'I hate you. You're not even any good to me dead.'" In the car on the ride back to the precinct, Rook went right to the grieving widow. "Come on, Detective Heat. No good to me dead? You talk about gathering information that paints a picture. What about this portrait we're seeing of Samantha the lap dancer?" "But she knew there was no life insurance. Where's the motive?" He grinned and needled her again. "Gee, I don't know, but my advice is to keep asking questions and see where they lead." "Bite me." "Oh, are you talking tough with me now that you have other irons in the fire?" "I'm talking tough because you are an ass, and I don't get what you mean by other irons." "I mean Noah Paxton. I didn't know whether to throw a bucket of water on you or fake a cell phone call to leave you 2 alone. This is why you're a magazine writer who only plays cop. Your imagination is greater than your grasp of facts." He shrugged. "Guess I was wrong." Then he smiled that smile, the one that made her face flush. And there she was again, feeling this torment over Rook for something she should have laughed off. Instead, she popped in her earbud and speed-dialed Rayleigh. "Rails, it's me." She angled her head toward Rook and sounded brisk and formal, so he wouldn't miss her meaning, even though she did radiate subtext. "I want you to run a background on Matthew Starr's financial guy. Name's Noah Paxton. Just see what kicks out. Priors, warrants, the usual." After she hung up, Rook looked amused. This was going nowhere she liked, but she had to say it. "What?" And when he didn't answer, "What?" "You forgot to have him run a check on Paxton's cologne." And then he opened a magazine and read. Detective Rayleigh looked up from his computer when Heat and Rook came into the bullpen. "That guy you wanted me to run, Noah Paxton?" "Yeah, you got something?" "Not so far, but he called for you just now." Nicky avoided the playground look she was getting from Rook and surveyed the stack of messages on her desk. Noah Paxton's was on top. She didn't pick it up. Instead, she asked Rayleigh if Ochoa had checked in. He was on Kimberly Starr surveillance. The widow was spending the afternoon at Bergdorf Goodman. "I hear shopping is a balm for the bereaved," said Rook. "Or maybe the merry widow is returning a few designer rags for ready cash." When Rook disappeared into the men's room, Heat dialed Noah Paxton. She had nothing to hide from Rook. She just didn't want to deal with his pre-adolescent taunts, or see that smile that chapped her ass. She cursed the mayor for whatever payback made her have to deal with him. When Paxton got on the line, he said, "I located those life insurance documents you said you wanted to see." "Good, I'll send someone over." "I also got a visit from those forensic accountants you were talking about. They copied all my data and left. You weren't kidding." "Your tax dollars at work." She couldn't resist adding, "You do pay your taxes." "Yes, but you don't have to take my word for it. Your CPAs with badges and guns look like they'll be able to tell you." "Count on it." Listen, I know I wasn't the most cooperative. You did all right after I threatened you. I want to apologize for that. I'm finding I don't do well with grief." "You wouldn't be the first, Noah," said Nicky. "Trust me." She sat alone that night at the center row of the movie theater, laughing and munching popcorn. Nicky Heat was transfixed, swept up in an innocent story and spellbound by the eye candy of digital animation. Like a house tied to 1,000 balloons, she was transported. Just over 90 minutes later, she carried the weight again on her walk home in the mugginess of the heat wave, which brought fusty odors up out of subway grates and, even in the dark, radiated the day's swelter off buildings as she passed them. At times like these, without the work to hide in, without the martial arts to quiet it, the replay always came. It had been 10 years, and yet it was also last week, and last night, and all of them thatched together. Time didn't matter. It never did when she replayed the night. It was her first Thanksgiving break from college since her parents divorced. Nicky had spent the day shopping with her mother, a Thanksgiving Eve tradition transformed into a holy mission by her mom's new singleness. This was a daughter determined to make this not so much the best Thanksgiving ever, but as close to normal as could be achieved, given the empty chair at the head of the table and the ghosts of happier years. The two squeezed around each other, as they always had in the New York apartment-sized kitchen that night, making pies for the next day. Over tandem rolling pins and chilled dough, Nicky defended her desire to change majors from English to theater. Where were the cinnamon sticks? How could they have forgotten the cinnamon sticks? Ground cinnamon never flew in her mother's holiday pies. She grated her own from a stick, and how could they have overlooked that on their list? Nicky felt like a lotto winner when she found a jar of them on the spice aisle at the Morton Williams on Park Avenue South. For insurance, she took out her cell phone and called the apartment. It rang and rang. When the message machine kicked on, she wondered if her mom couldn't hear the phone over her mixer. But then she picked up. Over the squeal of recorder feedback, she apologized, but she had been wiping butter off her hands. Nicky hated the sharp reverb of the answering machine, but her mother never knew how to turn that damn thing off without disconnecting. Last call before closing. Did she need anything else from the market? She waited while her mom carried the portable to check on evaporated milk. And then Nicky heard glass crash, and her mother scream. Her limbs went weak, and she called for her mom. Heads turned from the check stands. Another scream. As she heard the phone on the other end drop, Nicky dropped the jar of cinnamon sticks and ran to the door. Damn, the indoor. She brute-forced it open and ran out in the street, nearly getting clipped by a delivery guy on a bicycle. 2 blocks away. She held the cell phone to her ear as she ran, pleading for her mom to say something. Pick up the phone. What's wrong? She heard a man's voice, sounds of a scuffle. Her mother's whimper and her body dropping next to the phone. A tang of metal bouncing on the kitchen floor. 1 block to go. A clink of bottles in the fridge door. The snap hiss of a pop-top. Footsteps. Silence. And then her mother's weak and failing moan. And then just a whisper. Nicky. Chapter 4. Nicky didn't go home following the movie after all. She stood on the sidewalk in the warm, spongy air of the summer night, looking up at her apartment, the one where she had lived as a girl and that she had left to go to college in Boston, and then left again on an errand to buy cinnamon sticks because ground wouldn't do. The only thing up there in that 2-bedroom was solitude without peace. She could be 19 again, walking into a kitchen where her mother's blood was pooling under the refrigerator. Or she could bat the image balloons away. She could catch some news on the tube and hear about more crimes. Heat-related, the team coverage would say. Heat-related crime. There was a time when that had made Nicky Heat smile. She weighed texting Don to see if her combat trainer was up for a beer and some close-quarter bedroom grapples against the alternative of letting some late-night comic in a suit help her escape without the crowded bathroom in the morning. There was another alternative. 20 minutes later, in her empty precinct squad room, the detective swiveled in her chair to contemplate the white board. She already had it burnished in her head, all the elements to date pasted and scrawled inside that frame which did not yet reveal a picture, the list of fingerprint matches. The green 5x7 index card, with its bullet points of Kimberly Starr's alibis and prior lives. Photos of Matthew Starr's body where he hit the sidewalk. Photos from the ME of the punch bruising on Starr's torso, with a distinctive hexagonal mark left by a ring. She rose and walked up to the ring mark photo. More than studying its size and shape, the detective listened to it, knowing that at any time any piece of evidence could gain a voice. This photo, above all other puzzle pieces on the board, was whispering to her. It had been in her ear all day, and its whisper was the song that had drawn her to the squad room in the stillness of night, so she could hear it clearly. What it whispered was a question. Why would a killer, who tossed a man over a balcony, also beat him with non-lethal blows? These bruises weren't random contusions from any scuffle. They were precise and patterned, some even overlapping. Don, her combat boxing instructor, called it painting your opponent. One of the first things Nikki Heat had implemented when she took command of her homicide unit was a system to facilitate information sharing. She logged on the server and opened the read-only file, Ochoa. Scrolling through pages, she came to his witness interview with the doorman at the Guilford. Love that Ochoa, she thought. His keyboard skills are crap, but he took great notes and asked the right questions. Question: had Vic left building any time during course of morning? Answer: no. Nikki closed Ochoa's file and looked at the clock. She could text her boss, but he might not see it, like if he was sleeping. Drumming her fingers on the phone was only making it later, so she punched his number. On the fourth ring, Heat cleared her throat, preparing to leave a voicemail, but Montrose picked up. His hello was not sleepy, and she could hear the TV blasting the weather forecast. Hope it's not too late to call, Captain. If it's too late, it's too late to hope. What's up? I came in to screen that surveillance cam video from the Guilford, and it's not here yet. Do you know where it is? Her boss covered the phone and said something muffled to his wife. When he came back to Nikki, the TV sound was off. He said, I got a call tonight during dinner from the attorney representing their residence board. This is a building with wealthy tenants sensitive about privacy issues. Do they have issues with their fellow tenants hurtling past their windows? You trying to convince me? For them to give it up, it'll take a court order. I'm looking at the clock and thinking we'll wait to find a judge to issue one in the morning. He heard her sigh because she made sure he did. He couldn't stand effectively losing another day waiting for a court order. Nikki, get some sleep, he said with his usual gentle touch. We'll get it for you sometime tomorrow. Of course the skipper was right. Waking a judge to cut a warrant was capital you spent on high-priority matters against a ticking clock. To most judges, this was just another homicide, and she knew better than to push Captain Montrose to squander a chip like that. So she switched her desk lamp off. Then she switched it back on. Rook was pals with the judge. Horace Simpson was a poker pal at the weekly game. She always ducked when Rook invited her. Simpson was not as sexy a name drop as Jagger, but, last she heard, none of the Stones was issuing warrants. But hang on, she thought. Eager was one thing. Owing a favor to Jameson Rook was another. And besides, she had overheard him boasting to Roach he had a dinner date with that groupie in the halter who crashed Nikki's crime scene. At this hour, Heaton might be interrupting the application of his autograph to a new and more exciting body part. So she picked up the phone and dialed Rook's cell. Heat, he said with no surprise. It was more a shout-out like on Cheers when they'd holler, Norm. She listened for background noise, but why? Did she expect Kenny G and a champagne cork? Is this a bad time? The caller ID says you're at the precinct. Evasion. Rider Monkey wasn't answering her question. Maybe if she threatened the zoo lockup. A cop's work is never done and all that. Are you writing? I'm in a town car. Just had an awesome meal at Balthazar. Then silence. She had called to screw with him. How did her head end up being the one messed with? You can give me your Zagat rating some other time. This is a business call, she told him, even as she wondered if his halter groupie knew not to wear cut-off jeans to a bistro, Soho hip or otherwise. I called to tell you, don't come in for the morning meeting. It's off. Off? That's a first. The plan was for us to prep for a sit-down with Kimberly Starr tomorrow morning. That meeting's in question now. Rook sounded beautifully alarmed. How come we need to get with her? She loved the urgency in his voice more than she felt guilty for playing him. The whole reason to see her is to screen surveillance pictures from the Guilford yesterday, but I can't get access to the surveillance tape without a warrant, and good luck reaching a judge tonight. He'd envisioned underwater video of a big-mouth bass opening wide for the miracle lure on one of those sport fishing infomercials she saw too many of on her sleepless nights. I know a judge. Forget it. Horace Simpson. Now Nicky was up, pacing the length of the bullpen, trying to keep the grin out of her voice as she said, "Listen to me, Rook. Stay out of this." "I'll call you back." "Rook, I'm telling you no," she said in her best command voice. "I know he's still up, probably watching his softcore porn channel." And then Nicky heard the woman giggle in the background, just as Rook hung up. He'd had gotten just what she wanted, but it somehow didn't feel like the win-win she'd envisioned. And why did she care? She asked herself yet again. At 10 o'clock the next morning, in the stickiness of what the tabloids were calling the summer of simmer, Nicky Heat, Roach, and Rook met under the Guilford canopy holding 2 sets of 12 still frames from the lobby's surveillance camera. Heat left Rayleigh and Ochoa to show one array to the doorman, while she and Rook entered the building for their appointment with Kimberly Starr. As soon as the elevator doors closed, he started in. "You don't have to thank me." "Why should I thank you? I specifically told you not to call that, Judge. As usual, you do what you please, meaning the opposite of what I say." He paused to absorb the truth of that and said, "You're welcome." Then he broke out with that shit-eater of his. "It's the subtext thing. Ooh, the air is thick with it this morning, Detective Heat." And was he even looking at her? No, he was tilted back enjoying the upcount of LED numbers, yet she still felt all X-rayed and naked and at a loss for words. The soft bell chimed a rescue signal on 6. Damn him. When it was Noah Paxton who opened the front door of Kimberly Starr's apartment, Nicky made a mental note to find out if the widow and the accountant were sleeping together. On an open murder case, everything went on the table, and what belonged more on the what-if list than a trophy wife with an appetite for cash and the man who handled the money hatching a pillow-talk conspiracy. But she let it go by saying, "This is a surprise." "Kimberly's running late from her beauty appointment," said Paxton. "I was dropping off some documents for her to sign, and she called to see if I'd keep you entertained until she got here." "Nice to see she's focused on finding her husband's killer," said Rook. "Welcome to my world. Trust me, Kimberly doesn't do focus." Detective Heat tried to read his tone. Was it true exasperation or cover? "While we're waiting, I want you to look at some pictures." Heat found the same tapestried chair as she had on her last visit and took out a manila envelope. Paxton sat opposite her on the sofa, and she dealt 2 rows of 4x6 prints on the red lacquer coffee table in front of him. "Look carefully at each of these people. Tell me if any of them looks familiar." Paxton studied each of the dozen photos. Nicky did what she always did during a photo array, studied the studier. He was methodical, moving right to left, top row then bottom, no inordinate pauses, all very even. Without any sense of desire, she wondered if he was like that in bed, and once again thought about her untaken road to the suburbs and more pleasant routines. When Paxton was done, he said, "I'm sorry, but I don't recognize any of these people." And then he said what everybody said when they came up empty. "Is one of these the killer?" And he looked again, as they all did, wondering which one did it, as if they could tell by looking. "Can I ask an obvious question?" said Rook as Heat slid her photos back in the envelope. As usual, he didn't wait for permission to shoot his mouth off. If Matthew Starr was so broke, why didn't he just sell off some of his stuff? I'm looking around at all this antique furniture, the art collection. That chandelier alone could fund an emerging nation for about a year. He looked at the Italian porcelain chandelier, the French sconces, the floor-to-cathedral ceiling display of framed paintings, the gilded Louis XV mirror, the ornate furniture, and thought, then again, sometimes Rider Monkey came out with the gem. "Look, I don't feel comfortable talking about this." Then he glanced over Nicky's shoulder, as if Kimberly Starr might come walking in. "It's a simple question," said the detective. She knew she'd regret giving the props to Rook, but added, "And a good one. And you're the money man, right?" "I wish it were that simple." "Try me, because I hear you telling me how broke the man was, company imploding, personal money leaking like an Alaskan oil tanker, And then I look at all this. What's this worth anyway? That I can answer, he said. ITE 48 to 60 million. ITE? Rook answered that. In today's economy. Even at a fire sale, 48 mil solves a lot of problems. I have opened the books to you. I have explained the financial picture. I've looked at your pictures. Isn't that enough? No, and you know why? With her forearms on her knees, she leaned forward to him and bored in. Because there is something you're not wanting to say, and I will hear it here or at the precinct. She gave him space to have whatever his internal dialogue was, and after a few seconds he said, It just feels wrong to dump on him in his own home after he just died. She waited again, and he let go. Matthew had a monster ego. You have to have one to accomplish what he did, but his was off the chart. His narcissism made this collection bulletproof. But he was in financial quicksand, she said. Which is exactly the reason he ignored my advice. Advice, hell, my hounding, to piece it off. I wanted him to sell before bankruptcy creditors went after it, but this room was his palace. Proof to him and the world he was still king. Now that it was out, Paxton became more animated and paced along the walls. You saw the offices yesterday. No way Matthew would meet a client there, so we brought them here so he could negotiate from his throne, surrounded by his little Versailles, the Star Collection. He loved big shots standing over one of these Queen Anne chairs and asking if it was okay to sit, or looking at a painting and knowing what he paid for it. And if they didn't ask, he made sure to tell them. Sometimes I hid my face. It was so embarrassing. So what happens to all this now? Now, of course, I can start liquidation. There are debts to pay, not to mention Kimberly's taste to support. I think she'll be more prone to lose a few knickknacks to maintain her lifestyle. And after you pay the debts, will there be enough to make up for a husband not having life insurance? Oh, I don't think Kimberly will need to throw any telethons, said Paxton. Nicky processed that as she wandered the room. Last time she visited, it was a crime scene. Now she was simply taking in its opulence. The crystal, the tapestries, the Kentian bookcase with fruit and flower carvings. She saw a painting she liked, a Raoul Dufy yachting scene, and leaned in for a closer look. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts was a 10-minute walk from her dorm when Nicky attended Northeastern. Although the hours she spent there as an art lover did not qualify her as an art expert, she recognized some of the works Matthew Starr had collected. They were expensive, but to her eye the room was a 2-story grab bag. Impressionists hung beside old masters. 1930s German poster art rubbed elbows with an Italian religious triptych from the 1400s. She lingered before John Singer Sargent's study for one of her favorite paintings, Carnation Lily, Lily Rose. Though it was a preliminary sketch in oil, one of the many Sargent made before each finished painting, she found herself transfixed by the familiar little girls, so wonderfully innocent in their white play dresses, lighting Chinese lanterns in a garden in the delicate glow of twilight. And then she wondered what it was doing beside the brash Gino Severini, a pricey, no doubt, but gaudy canvas of oil and crushed sequins. Every other collection I've seen has a, theme to it, or common feel, or what am I trying to say? Taste? Said Paxton. Now that he'd crossed his line, it was a free fire zone. Even so, he lowered his voice to a hush and looked around as if he would be ducking lightning bolts or speaking ill of the dead. But speak ill he did. If you're looking to see rhyme or reason for this collection, you won't, due to one unavoidable fact. Matthew was a vulgarian. He didn't know art. He knew price. Rook came up beside Heat and said, I think if we keep looking, we'll find a dog's playing poker, which made her laugh. Even Paxton indulged himself a chuckle. They all stopped when the front door opened and Kimberly Starr breezed in. Sorry I'm late. Heat and Rook stared at her, barely masking disbelief and judgment. Her face was swollen from Botox or some other series of cosmetic injections. Redness and bruising highlighted the unnatural swelling of her lips and smile lines. Her brow and forehead were marked with deep pink speed bumps that filled wrinkle lines and seemed to be growing before their eyes. The woman looked as if she had fallen face first into a hornet's nest. The traffic lights were out on Lexington. Damn heat wave. I left the papers on the desk in the study, said Noah Paxton. He already had his briefcase in one hand and the other on the doorknob. "I have a lot of loose ends to attend to at the office. Detective Heat, if you need me for anything, you know how to find me." The eye roll he gave Nicky behind Kimberly's back threw water on Heat's trophy wife accountant sleeping together hypothetical, although she would still check it out. Kimberly and the detective took their identical seats in the living room from the day of the murder. Rook avoided the toile wing chair and sat on the couch with Mrs. Starr. Probably so he wouldn't have to look at her, thought Nicky. The face work wasn't the only change. She was out of her Talbots and into Ed Hardy, a black tank dress with a large tattoo print of a red rose and the legend, "Dedicated to the one I love," in biker scroll. At least the widow was in black. Kimberly came at her brusquely, like this was some intrusion on the rest of her day. "Well, you said you have something for me to look at?" He didn't personalize. Her style was to assess, not judge. Her assessment was that, personal grief modality aside, Kimberly Starr was treating her like the hired help, and she needed to reverse that power dynamic, and fast. "Why did you lie to me about your whereabouts at the time of your husband's murder, Mrs. Starr?" The woman's swollen face was still capable of registering some emotions, and fear was one of them. Nicky Heat liked the look. "What do you mean? Lie? Why would I lie?" "I'll get to that when I'm ready. First, I want to know where you were between 1 and 2 p.m., since you were not at Dino Bites. You lied." "I didn't lie. I was there." "You dropped your son and nanny off and left. I already have witnesses. Should I ask the nanny also?" "No, that's true. I left." "Where were you, Mrs. Starr? And this time I'd advise you to be truthful." "All right. I was with a man. I was embarrassed to tell you." "Tell me now. What do you mean with a man?" "God, you're a bitch. I was sleeping with this guy, okay? Happy?" "What's his name?" "You can't be serious." The face Nicky gave her could still show the full range of expression. It told her she was quite serious. "And don't say Barry Gable. He says you stood him up." He'd watched Kimberly's mouth go slack. "Barry Gable, you know, the man who assaulted you on the street, the one you told Detective Ochoa must have been a purse snatcher and that you didn't know him?" "I was having an affair. My husband just died. I was embarrassed to say." "So if you're over your shyness, Kimberly, tell me about this other affair, so I can verify your whereabouts. And, as I'm sure you just figured out, I will check." Kimberly gave her the name of a doctor, Corey Van Pelt. Yes, it was the truth, she said, and yes, it was the same doctor she had seen this morning. He'd had her spell his name and wrote it on her pad, along with his number. Kimberly said she met him when she went in for a facial assessment 2 weeks ago, and they had this magic thing. Heat was betting the magic was in his pants and was his wallet, but she knew better than to say so. She prayed Rook had the same sense. As long as things were in a hostile vein, Nicky decided to press on. In a few minutes, she would need Kimberly's cooperation with the photos and wanted her to think twice about lying, or be so rattled she'd do it poorly if she did. A lot of things can't be taken at face value with you. What's that supposed to mean? You tell me, loud Domina. Excuse me? And Samantha? Hey, don't you start with that, nuh-uh. Wow, that's cool. You sounded pure Long Island. She turned to Rook. See what stress does? All that preppy posing falls away. First of all, my legal name is Kimberly Starr. There's no crime in changing a name. Help me out. Why Samantha? I'm picturing you with your natural color and see you more as a Tiffany or Crystal. You cops. You always loved to give us girls a hard time for getting by any way we could. People do what they gotta do, you know. That's why we're having this conversation, to find out who did what. If that means that I killed my husband, God, I can't believe I just said that. The answer is no. She waited for some response from Heat, and Nicky didn't give it. Let her wonder, she thought. My husband changed his name, too. Did you know that? In the 80s. He took a branding seminar and decided what was holding him back was his name, Bruce DeLay. He said the words construction and delay weren't the best-selling tool, so he researched names that would be brand positive. You know, upbeat and inspiring confidence. He made a list of names like Champion and Best. He picked Star and added the extra R so it wouldn't sound fake. Much as she had the day before, when she'd crossed from his opulent lobby into his ghost town offices, he'd watched another chunk of Matthew Starr's public image crack and drop off. How did he end up with Matthew? Research. He did focus groups to see what name people trusted that went with his look. So what if I changed my name too? BFD, you know. Detective Heat decided she had got as much as she was going to get out of this line of questions, and was happy at least to have a fresh alibi to check. She took out her photo array. As she began to lay down the pictures and tell her to take her time, Kimberly interrupted her on the third shot. "This man here, I know him, that's Myrick." Nicky felt the tingle she got when a domino was tipping, ready to fall. "And how do you know him?" "He was Matt's bookie." "Is Myrick a first or last name?" "You're all about names today, aren't you?" "Kimberly, he might have killed your husband." "I don't know which name. He was just Myrick. Polish dude, I think, not sure." Nicky had her examine the rest of the array without any other hits. "And you're positive your husband placed bets with this man?" "Yeah, why wouldn't I be sure of that?" When Noah Paxton looked at these pictures, he didn't recognize him. If he's paying the bills, wouldn't he know him? Noah? He refused to deal with the bookmaking. He had to give Matthew the cash, but looked the other way. Kimberly said she didn't know Myrick's address or phone number. "No, I only saw him when he came to the door, showed up at a restaurant." The detective would double-check Starr's desk and personal diary or his BlackBerry for some coded entry or recent call list, but a name and face and occupation was a good start. As she squared her stack of photos to put away, she told Kimberly she had thought she didn't know about her husband's gambling. "Come on, a wife knows, just like I knew about his women. Do you want to know how much for Jewel I took in the last 6 years?" No, Nicky did not care to know, but she did ask her for any names she recalled of her husband's past lovers. Kimberly said most of them seemed casual, a few one-nighters and weekends at casinos, and she didn't know their names. Only one got serious, and that was with a young marketing executive on his staff, an affair that lasted 6 months and ended about 3 years ago, after which the executive left the company. Kimberly gave Nicky the woman's name and got her address off a love letter she had intercepted. "You can keep that if you want. I only held on to it in case we got divorced and I needed to squeeze his balls." With that, Nicky left her to grieve. They found Roach waiting for them in the lobby. Both had their coats off, and Rayleigh's shirt was soaked through again. "You've got to start wearing undershirts, Rayleigh," said Heat as she walked up. "And how about switching to an Oxford?" added Ochoa. "Those polyester things you're wearing go see-through when you sweat." "Turning it on, Ochoa?" asked Rayleigh. His partner jabbed back. "Much like your shirt, you see right through me." Roach reported the same hit off the photo array when they showed it to the doorman. "We had to sort of pry it out of him," said Ochoa. "Doorman was a little embarrassed Myrick slipped into the building. These guys always call up to the apartment before letting anybody in. He said he was taking a leak in the alley and must have missed him, but he did catch him coming out." Quoting from the notes, the doorman described Myrick as a scrawny little ferret who came by to see Mr. Starr from time to time, but whose visits had become more frequent over the past 2 weeks. "Plus, we scored a bonus," said Rayleigh. "This gentleman was coming out with Ferret Dude that day." He peeled off another shot from the array and held it up. "Looks like Myrick brought some muscle." Of course, Nicky's instincts had already been crackling about this other guy, the Brooder, when she screened the lobby video that morning. He was in a loose shirt, but she could tell he was a bodybuilder, or at least spent a lot of his day at the weight rack. Under any other circumstances, she wouldn't have thought twice and would have assumed he was delivering air conditioners, probably one under each arm, from the looks of him. But the serene lobby of the Guilford wasn't the service entrance, and a grown man had been tossed off his balcony there that day. Did the doorman give a name for this guy? Ochoa looked at his notes again. Only the nickname he gave him, Iron Man. While the precinct ran Myrick and Iron Man Doe through the computer, digitals of the pair were blast sent to detectives and patrols. It was impossible for Heat's small unit to canvass every known bookie in Manhattan, even assuming Myrick wasn't known and wasn't from one of the other boroughs, or even Jersey. Plus, a man like Matthew Starr might even use an exclusive betting service or the Internet, both of which he probably did. But if he was the volatile mix of desperation and invincibility Noah Paxton painted him to be, chances were he'd hit the street as well. So they split up to concentrate on known bookmakers in 2 zones. The Roach coach got the tour of the Upper West Side in a radius around the Guilford, while Heat and Rook covered Midtown near the Star Point headquarters, roughly Central Park South to Times Square. "This is exasperating," said Rook after their 4th stop, a street vendor who suddenly decided he didn't speak English when Heat showed him her shield. He was one of several runners for the major bookies whose mobile food carts were a convenient one-stop for bets and kebabs. They were treated to eye-stinging smoke that swirled off his grill and found them wherever they moved, while the vendor furrowed his brow at the photos and ultimately shrugged. "Welcome to police work, Rook. This is what I call the street Google. We are the search engine. It's how it gets done." As they drove to the next address, a discount electronics store on 51st, a front specializing more in bets than boom boxes, Rook said, "I have to tell you, a week ago, if you told me I'd be hitting the shawarma carts looking for Matthew Starr's bookie, I never would have believed it." "You mean this doesn't fit the image? This is where you and I come from different places. You write these magazine pieces. You're all about selling the image. I'm all about looking behind it. I'm frequently disappointed, but seldom wrong. Behind every picture hides the true story. You just have to be willing to look." "Yeah, but this guy was big. Maybe not elite, but he was at least the bus and truck Donald Trump." "I always thought Donald Trump was the bus and truck Donald Trump," she said. "And who's Kimberly Starr, the truck stop Tara Reid? If she's the poor little rich girl, what's she doing blowing 10 grand on that face?" "If I had to guess, she bought it with Barry Gable's money. Or she took it in trade with their new doctor boyfriend. Trust me, I'll find out. But a woman like Kimberly's not going to start clipping supermarket coupons and eating ramen one night a week. She's all about prepping her face for her next season of The Bachelor. If they're holding it on the island of Dr. Moreau." She didn't like herself for it, but she laughed. It only encouraged him. "Or she's doing a remake of Elephant Man." Rook took guttural breaths and slurred, "I am not a suspect. I am a human being." The radio call came when they were getting in the car, after the discount electronics store dead end. Roach had spotted Myrick in front of the off-track betting facility on West 72nd and was making a move, calling for backup. Pete slapped the gumball on the roof and told Rook to buckle up and hang on. He beamed and actually said, "Can I work the siren?" Chapter 5. There is very little chance of a high-speed pursuit on any street in Midtown Manhattan. Detective Heat accelerated, then braked, eased forward, jerked the wheel hard right, and accelerated again, until she was forced to brake again in a matter of yards. As she continued like that, working the avenue uptown, her face was set in concentration, eyes darting to old mirrors, then to the sidewalk, then to the crosswalk, then to the double-parked delivery guy who swung his van door open and almost became roadkill but for her experience and skill at the wheel. The siren and light meant nothing in this traffic. Maybe to the pedestrians, but the traffic lanes were so packed, even the drivers who cared enough to pull aside and make a hole had scant room to maneuver. "Come on, move it!" shouted Rook from the passenger seat at another taxi trunk sitting there in front of their windshield. His voice was dry from adrenaline, his words punctuated by air squeezed out against his seatbelt with each sudden braking, which broke his syllables in two. Heat maintained her tense composure. This was the live-action video game cops played every day in this borough, a race against the clock through an obstacle course of construction, stalls, jams, daredevils, idiots, sons of bitches, and the unaware. She knew 8th would be all stops south of Columbus Circle. Then, for once, gridlock worked in her favor. A stretch Hummer, also heading uptown, was blocking the crossflow at 55th. Nikki gunned it through the sliver of daylight it created and pulled a sharp left. Taking advantage of the lighter traffic the Hummer block created, she sped crosstown to 10th, with Rook's expletives and Ochoa's radio chatter filling her ears. Things improved, as she had projected when she squealed around the corner at 10th. After a game of dodgem through the two-way intersection at West 57th, 10th became Amsterdam Avenue and grew wider shoulders and a nice emergency lane up the middle that some drivers even respected. She was ripping it north with a little more speed, past the back of Lincoln Center, when the call came from Rayleigh. He had custody of Myrick. Ochoa was in pursuit of Suspect 2, on the run west on 72nd. "That would be Iron Man," she said, her first words since her instructions to Rook back in Times Square to buckle up and hang on. Ochoa was gasping into his walkie when she shot through 70th, where Amsterdam and Broadway crossed at an X. "Suspect running west, now at Broadway." "He's heading for the subway station," Heat said to Rook, but more talking out loud. "Crossing," a loud car horn, and then, "Suspect crossing Broadway to subway station." She keyed her radio. "Suspect description." "Copy. White male. 225. Red shirt over cami pants. Black shoes." To complicate things, there were 2 station houses at the 72nd and Broadway subway. the old stone historic building on the south side and the newer glass and metal atrium station house just across the street to the north. Nicky pulled up to the old stone building. She knew the OTB sat mid-block on the north side of 72nd, so a fleeing Iron Man would likely duck into the closest station, the newer one, and Ochoa would be following there. Her idea was to cut him off from escaping up the tunnel of this one. "Stay in the car, I mean it," she called over her shoulder to Rook as she bailed out of the driver's side, hanging her shield around her neck. The MTA tunnels ran 10 degrees warmer than street temps, and the air that rose up from underground to greet her as she sprinted past the Metro card machines toward the turnstiles was a mix of garbage funk and oven blast. He'd vaulted a turnstile with a sweaty hand that slipped on the stainless steel. She recovered her balance but landed in a low crouch and found herself looking up at the Hulk in the red tank top and camis as he crested the stairs. "Police, freeze," she said. Ochoa was coming up the steps behind him. Cut off from retreat, the big man broke around Heat for the turnstiles. She blocked him, and he clawed her shoulder. She brought one hand up to break his grip at the wrist, and with the other grabbed his tricep and pulled his back across the front of her body so he couldn't reach her to land a punch. Then she grabbed his belt, hooked his ankle with hers, and dropped him on his back. He hit hard. As Heat heard the air come out of him, she scissored a leg over his neck and yanked his wrist toward her in what a certain ex-Navy SEAL called an arm bar. He struggled to rise up, but found himself staring into her gun. "Go ahead," she said. Iron Man laid his head back on the grimy tiles, and that was that. "Not very quotable," said Rook on the drive back to the precinct. "I told you to wait in the car. You never wait in the car." "I thought you might need help." "From you?" she scoffed. "Wouldn't do to re-injure those tender ribs." "You do need help. Writer help. You take down a character like that and the best you can do is go ahead." "What's wrong with that?" "Sorry, detective, but I'm left sort of hanging, like the shave and a haircut minus the all-important 2 bits. He glanced over his shoulder into the back seat at the manacled Iron Man staring out the side window at a Flash Dancer's ad on a cab top. "Although +10 for not saying make my day." "As long as you're happy, Rook, I've done my job." A column of fluorescent light cut into the dimness of the precinct observation booth as Jameson Rook stepped in to join Heat and her 2 detectives. "Got one for who wrote It's Raining Men. Ready?" said Ochoa. Spirits were palpably lighter after the afternoon's arrests. One part come down from the adrenaline, one part feeling this case would clear if their 2 prisoners did Matthew Starr. Rook crossed his arms and smirked. "Let me hear it." "Dolly Parton." "Oh," moaned Rook. "I knew I should have put money on this." "Hint," said Rayleigh. "Living." Bigger hint from Ochoa. Rook was loving this and announced, like a game show host, "This famous co-writer is a he, and is on network television every day." "Al Roker," shouted Rayleigh. "Excellent guess. No." "Paul Schaefer," said Heat. Rook couldn't hide his astonishment. "That's right. Was that a lucky guess, or did you know?" "Your turn to guess." She flashed a smile that dropped as fast as it appeared. "Oh, and my prize for winning? You wait here in the ob room while I do my work." Detective Heat kept the 2 suspects separated for their interrogations as a matter of practice. The 2 had been apart since their arrests to prevent them from co-formulating stories and alibis. Her first session was with Myrick, the bookie, who indeed had ferret-like qualities. He was a small man, 5'4", with thin, pasty arms that could have gone missing from a Mr. Potato Head. She selected him because he was the known person, and if there was such a thing, the brains of the 2. "Myrick," she said. "That's Polish, right?" "Polish-American," he said with the lightest trace of accent. "I came to this country in 1980 after this thing we called the Gdansk shipyard strike." "We, as in you and Lech Wałęsa?" "That is right. Solidarnosc, yes?" "Myrick, you were 9. "No matter. It's in the blood, yes?" Less than a minute, and Nicky had this guy down. A time filler. An amiable who talks and talks but says nothing. If she kept up the ballet, she'd be there hours and come out with a headache and no information. So corral him as best she could, she decided. "Do you know why we picked you up?" "Is this like speeding ticket? An officer asks you to tell him how fast you are going? I don't think so." "You've been arrested before." Yes, number of times. I think you have a list in there, right? He nodded his long nose to the file on the metal tabletop in front of her, then looked at her. His eyes were deep-set and so close together they almost crossed. Calling him a ferret might be complimentary. Why did you go to the Guilford day before yesterday? The Guilford on West 77th, very nice building, that. A palace, yes? Why were you there? Was I? She slapped the flat of her hand down on the table and he jumped. Good, she thought. Let's change the tempo. Let's cut the bull, Myrick. I have eyewitnesses and photographs. You and your goon went to see Matthew Starr, and now he's dead. And you think I had something to do with this tragedy? Myrick was a slippery one, a true slime bag, and from her experience, the ripest type for divide and conquer. I think you can be helpful here, Myrick. Maybe whatever happened to Mr. Starr wasn't your doing. Maybe your pal, Pachenko, got a little more excited than he was supposed to when you went to collect your debt. It happens. Did he get too excited? Whatever you're talking about, I don't know. I had an appointment to see Mr. Matthew Starr, of course. Why else would they allow me in such a wonderful building? But I went to his door, and he did not answer. So your statement is that you did not see Matthew Starr that day. I don't feel I need to repeat when I say so clearly. This guy had been through the mill too often, she thought. He knew all the moves, and none of his priors, though numerous, involved violence. Scams, cons, and bookmaking only. She shifted back to Iron Man. This other man, Pachenko, he came with you? The day I did not see Matthew Starr, he did come. You know that already, I bet, so there you go. You have a good answer from me. Why did you bring Pachenko to meet with Matthew Starr? To show him the wonderful building? Myrick laughed, showing a tiny row of ochre teeth. That's a good one. I'll remember that. Then why? Why take such a big guy like that? Oh, you know, in this economy, many people want to rob you on the streets. I sometimes carry sums of money, and one can't be too safe, yes? You aren't convincing me. I think you're lying. Myrick shrugged. Think what you like. It's free country. But I say this. You wonder if I killed Matthew Starr, and I say, why would I? Bad for business. Want to know my pet name for Matthew Starr? The ATM. Why would I pull plug on ATM? He gave her something to think about. Nonetheless, when she rose, she said, One more thing. Hold out your hands. He did. They were clean and pale, as if he had spent his days peeling potatoes in a washtub. Nikki Heat compared notes with her crew while they moved Pachenko from his holding cell to interrogation. That Myrick's a piece of work, said Ochoa. You see critters like that covered in sawdust and bitty cages when you raid meth dealers. Okay, we agree on the ferret profile, said Heat. What do we come away with that's useful? I think he did it. Rook, you say that about everyone we meet on this case. May I remind you of Kimberly Starr? But I hadn't seen this guy before. Or maybe it's his muscle. That's what you guys call them, muscle? Sometimes, said Rayleigh. There's also goon. Or thug, said Ochoa. Thug's good, continued Rayleigh. So's badass. Meat, from Ochoa. And the two detectives alternated euphemisms in rapid-fire succession. Gangsta. Gee. Punk. Bitch. Gristle. Nux. Ballbuster. Banger. But muscle works, said Ochoa. Gets it said, agreed Rayleigh. Rook had out his moleskin notebook and a pen. I gotta get some of these down before I forget. You do that, said Heat. I'll be in with the miscreant. Vitya Pachenko, you've been a busy boy since you came to this country. Nicky turned pages in his file, silent reading as if she didn't already know what was on them, and then closed it. His jacket was full of arrests for threats and violent acts, but no convictions. People either shied away from testifying against Iron Man, or they left town. You've gotten away clean. A lot. People either really like you, or they're really afraid of you. Pachenko sat looking straight ahead, with his eyes fixed on the two-way mirror. Not nervously checking himself, not like Barry Gable. No, he was fixed and focused on a point of his choosing, not looking at her, not like he was even in there with her. He seemed deep in his own mind and nowhere else. Detective Heat would have to change that. Your pal Myrick mustn't be afraid of you. The Russian didn't blink. Not from what he just told me. Still nothing. He had some interesting things to say about what you did to Matthew Starr at the Guilford day before yesterday. Slowly, he unhooked his eyes from the ozone and rotated his head to face her. As he did, his neck twisted, revealing veins and tendons strung deep into bulky shoulders. He stared at her from underneath a thick ginger brow. At this angle, in the downcast lighting, he had a prize-fighter's face, with a telltale nose that curved in an unnatural flatness where it had been broken. She decided he had been handsome once before the hardness. With the brush cut, she could picture the boy of him on a soccer field or lofting a stick in a hockey rink. But the hardness is what Pachenko was all about now, and whether it came from doing time in Russia or learning how not to do time, the boy was gone, and all she saw in that room was what happens when you get very, very good at surviving very, very bad things. Something like a smile formed in the deep creases at the corners of his mouth, but it never came. Then he spoke at last. In the subway station, when you were on top of me, I could smell you. You know what I'm talking about? Smelling you. Nicky Heat had been in all sorts of interrogations and interviews, with every stripe of lowlife in God's creation, and those too damaged to make the list. The wise guys and the crazies thought because she was a woman they could rattle her with some leering porn movie trash talk. A serial killer once asked her to ride in the van so he could pleasure himself on the way to the penitentiary. Her armor was strong. Nicky had the investigator's greatest gift, distance, or maybe it was disconnection. But Pachenko's casually spoken words, along with the entitled look he was giving her, the intrusion of his casualness and the threat carried in those amber resin eyes, made her shudder. She held his gaze and tried not to engage. I see you do know. And then, most chilling of all, he winked. I am going to have that. Then he made wet air kisses at her and laughed. Then Nicky heard something she had never heard in the interrogation room before, muffled shouting from the observation booth. It was Rook, his voice smothered by soundproofing and double-pane glass, hollering at Pachenko. It sounded like he was shouting through a pillow, but she heard animal, scumbag, filthy mouth, followed by pounding on the glass. She turned over her shoulder to look. Hard to be nonchalant when the mirror is flexing and rattling. Then came the dampened shouts of Roach, and it stopped. Pachenko glanced from the mirror to her with an unsettled look. Whatever had gotten into Rook's pea-brain and made him slip his leash in there, he had succeeded in undercutting the Russian's moment of intimidation. Detective Heat latched onto the opportunity and flipped the subject without comment. "Let me see your hands," she said. "But you want my hands? Come closer." She stood, trying to gain height and distance and most of all dominance. "Put your hands flat on the table, Pachenko. Now." He decided he would choose when it was time, but he didn't wait long. The shackles on one wrist clacked against the table edge, and then the shackles on the other, as he spread his palms on the cold metal. His hands were scuffed and swollen. A few knuckles were pluming into bruises. Others were missing skin and wept where they had not yet scabbed over. On the middle finger of his right hand there was a thick stripe of blanched skin and a cut, the kind a ring would leave. "What happened here?" she said, relieved to feel in charge again. "What, this is nothing. Looks like a cut." "Yeah, I forgot to take my ring off before." "Before what?" "Before my workout." "What workout? At what gym? Tell me." "Who said anything about the gym?" And then his upper lip curled, and she instinctively took a step back, until she realized he was smiling. Captain Montrose's office was empty, so Nicky Heat ushered Rook inside and pulled the glass door shut. Just what the hell was that all about? I know, I lost it." "In the middle of my interrogation, Rook." "Did you hear what he was saying to you?" "No, I couldn't hear him over the pounding on the observation mirror." He looked away. "Pretty lame, huh?" "I'd call it a first. If this were Chechnya, right now you'd be riding down the mountain feet first on a goat. Will you knock it off about Chechnya? I get one movie option and you pick at it. Tell me you don't have it coming." "This time, maybe. Can I say something?" He didn't wait for an answer. "I don't know how you can stand doing this." "You kidding? It's my job." "But it's so ugly." "War zones aren't so much fun either, or so I've read." "War not so good, but that's just one part. In my job, I get to move from place to place. It may be a war zone one time, or riding in a jeep with a black hood over my head to visit a drug cartel, but then I get a month in Portofino and Nice with rock stars and their toys, or I shadow a celebrity chef for a week in Sedona or Palm Beach. But you, this is a sewer. Is this the equivalent of what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? Because if it is, I'll kick you in the balls to show you how not nice I can be. I like my job. I do what I do, and deal with the people I deal with, and here's a headline for your article, writer boy. Criminals are scum. Especially that G. She laughed. Excellent research notes, Rook. You sound so straight. Oh, and by the way, no goats. Popular misconception. Up in the Caucasus with General Yamadiev, it was all horses. That's how we rolled. When she watched him leave the room, she was surprised not to feel pissed anymore. How angry could you be at somebody who acted like he cared a little? A half-hour later, she sat with Rayleigh screening the surveillance video from the Guilford. Detective Heat did not look pleased. "Run it again," she said, "and let's watch every corner of the screen. Maybe we missed a piece of them coming back later." "What's wrong?" Rook arrived behind them, his breath smelling of contraband espresso. "It's the damn time code." She tapped her pen on the pale gray digital clock embedded on the bottom of the surveillance video. "It shows Mirik and Pochenko arriving at 10:31 a.m. They go up the elevator, right? And come back down to the lobby roughly 20 minutes later." Sure puts a hole in Mirik's statement that Starr never answered his door, unless it was a 20-minute knock. "Ask me, the only thing that got knocked was Matthew Starr," said Rayleigh. "This had to be when Pochenko gave him a boxing lesson." "That's not our problem, guys," said Heat. "According to this, our two Elvises left the building at 10:53 a.m., about 2.5 hours before our victim was thrown off his balcony." She tossed her pen onto the desktop in frustration. "So our two primes get cleared by the tape." "And they've lured up," added Ochoa, looking at his BlackBerry. "They're getting sprung now." From outside the security door, Heat stood with Roach and looked across the processing area as Mirik and Pochenko collected their property. Of course, Mirik was the one who had the attorney on call, and when the lawyer caught Detective Heat's eye, he didn't like what he saw, so he got extra busy with paperwork. "Guess I should cancel that search warrant for torn blue jeans at their apartments," said Rayleigh. "No, don't," said Nicky. "I know what the time code says, but what's the harm in checking? Details, gents. You'll never regret being thorough." And as Pochenko spotted her, she added, "In fact, add another item to Iron Man's search warrant, a large ring." When Ochoa left to get the warrant processed, she gave an assignment to Rayleigh. "I know it's drudgery, but I want you to screen that lobby video again from the moment those jokers left until a half-hour after Starr's time of death, and do it in real time, so we're sure we don't skip past them at high speed." Rayleigh left to do his screening. Nicky stayed to watch Mirik, his lawyer, and Pochenko head for the exit. The Russian lagged and split off from the other two, crossing to Heat. A uniform shadowed him, so he stopped in a safe zone, a good yard away from her. He took his time looking at her, head to toe, then said in a low whisper, "Relax. You're gonna like it." Then with a shrug, "Or not." And then he left without looking back. Nicky waited until the exit door shut, with Pochenko on the other side, before she went back to work.